Ciao a tutti e benvenuti a questo nuovo Dev Talk. Quest'oggi parliamo di front-end. Abbiamo un server Discord dove solitamente parliamo di tecnologia, trovate il link nella chat. Quest'oggi abbiamo un ospite internazionale che ci verrà a parlare di React, so the talk will be in English, quindi il talk sarà in inglese. I want to introduce our guest of today is Shawn. Hi, Shawn.
Hi. Hey, everyone.
How are you?
Hey, Giorgio. Good. Excited to talk today.
Okay. So, want to talk about yourself, your career a little bit?
Oh, sure. I am. what do I normally say? I'm from Singapore, and I'm currently in Seattle in the U.S. And I started my career in finance, but I changed to tech about 6 years ago, and mostly doing like React stuff, but then went into serverless, and now I'm fully in the backend. So kind of wandered my way all across the stack, but my core and my roots are in React, and I like talking about JavaScript and all the framework fundamentals. So the talk that we're going to do today is something that I have basically been learning or working on since I started learning React.
Okay. I follow you on Twitter, and I know you are also a super fan of Svelte and Tailwind for CSS.
Yes.
So follow these guys because his article and tweet are so interesting. So it's time to start, and you can share your screen and enjoy.
Yeah, I think I shared it already. Yeah. I'm not sure. Can you bring it up? Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
And let me know if there's any like chats that I need to
Yeah,
take care
if
of.
there are some chats, you prefer that I stop your introduction, or we can wait at the end?
No, you just stop me while I'm doing it because it's live anyway. So we might as well take advantage of it being live, right?
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Oh,
the stage is yours. Enjoy.
Yeah, I can also put the chat link. Looks like I don't have. Okay, I'll put it in our private chat inside of this StreamYard. So those are my slides in case anyone needs it. But otherwise, I'll just go through the 7 lessons to outlive React.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, part of this is because I stopped doing so much React, and when React Summit invited me to do a talk, I was like, okay, I don't use React that much anymore, but I still learn a lot from the thinking of React, and I think Svelte also learns a lot from the thinking of React. And I think every single framework that I look at now, I look at through the lens of what could be better, like what did React do very well that we can learn over. That's going to be enduring because ultimately this too shall pass, in the sense that jQuery, React is about as old as jQuery was when React was released, right? So nothing lasts forever, and this will pass someday. So it actually is a pretty interesting thought exercise to ask the question of what is going to last longer than the code, longer than the library or the APIs, what ideas and what lessons are going to actually last longer than React. So I think let's talk about it, because I'm very interested in ideas that last, because that's how you compound experience and interest and knowledge. Okay, so this talk was basically influenced by ReactConf 2018, when Sophie Alpert actually pointed out that React had crossed that sort of jQuery mark. And if you kind of extend it, React has maybe a few years more to grow to peak dominance, and then it will start a slow decline. And I think that's a very natural phase of evolution for a lot of frameworks and technologies. So yeah, hi, I'm Swix. I'm also a blogger at Swix.io, like Giorgio said. I primarily in my tech career worked at Netlify, AWS, and now I'm head of developer experience at Temporal. I was a moderator of the r/React.js subreddit. I created the React and TypeScript cheat sheet, where we teach 1,000 people a day React and TypeScript. I founded Svelte Society, and I am an author at learninpublic.org, which we'll talk about at the end of the show a little bit. I've given other React talks, and this is kind of like the highlights of my React speaking career. The first talk was at React Rally in 2018, why React is not reactive. Second talk, I cloned React from scratch in 30 minutes at JSConf Asia, and then I did it again at React Advanced London and Egghead.io. And then finally, at React Rally 2020, I talked a bit about the meta language of React. So all of this is just to say that if you want more technical, like React specific detailed stuff, you can go check out those talks. But this is sort of extracting the lessons that I learned across all of them. And I think it's worth stepping back sometimes and going, what are the lessons that will last beyond React? So I've identified 7. I think I had maybe a little bit more, but then I had to cut it, or like 7's a good number, you know. So these are top 7. So we'll talk a little bit about all of these, but I just wanted to show you up front so I don't hide anything from you. Okay, so the first one is that you want to have a framework represent a reconciler and a scheduler setup. So in other words, you want to figure out what work to do and then figure out when to do it. That's essentially this, like if you boil it down in a really simple way, that's the core of a lot of frameworks, really. A lot of job systems, a lot of system design and programming. It's ultimately just figuring out the different strategies for reconciling and scheduling. So this idea doesn't come from me like most ideas. I just am rephrasing and collecting ideas. Jordan Walk, who invented React, actually came up with this tweet, which I thought was very insightful. Whatever it is your program produces, pixels, files, anything, just make your program regenerate the whole thing every time. Add caching and structural sharing of previous versions to make it fast. That's it. It's kind of his core insight for React, and he is kind of sharing that. And that's pretty much what React reconciliation is, right? You diff every node until you find one node that is sort of dirty, and then you see every other node beyond it is dirty as well. And so there's a lot here which I can't really cover, but again, like I've done talks on React's reconciliation algorithm, so you can go check that out if you want. Scheduling. Scheduling is the second part, and this is probably the part that is the most change over the past 3 years, which is that we're switching from a stack reconciler or to a fiber reconciler, and that enables different forms of scheduling, and in particular this informs like concurrent scheduling with some prioritization, or in other words priority lanes. It used to be a public-facing API, but now it's actually so well done that there is no API for it. So you don't actually have to know it unless you look at the React internals. But scheduling makes a lot of sense because UI has different priorities when it comes to responsiveness, right? You should not have the calculation of a graphical chart block the rendering of your input layer. So having different scheduling algorithms makes a lot of sense, and making it consistent is a difficult problem, but React is the best library for that right now. Okay, here's an illustration of how that is. So the scheduler package has been spit out and hopefully being shared among frameworks so that we can all share the same scheduler if you use multiple frameworks, like in a micro front-end setting. And in the Chrome dev team, and this is Shubi, is actually talking about it at Chrome and contributing to this as well. So I think there's a lot of alignment between frameworks and the web platform for the first time in a long time. So it's pretty exciting to watch. But yeah, this is an illustration of how scheduling a properly scheduled rendering timeline actually looks if you're splitting them up correctly or time slicing them up correctly. And the main thing you want to avoid is dropping frames, right? Because that's ultimately what contributes to the perception of jankiness. You want to have user inputs render as fast as possible, and you want to not drop frames. Those are the main priorities. Everything else is an outcome of trying to design to those constraints. And then I think the final point on this is really the difference between a DX and UX monolith, which means that you want to have developer experience and user experience, and you want to have it in different modes. So the modes that I refer to are immediate mode in the front, which means you want to re-render everything in the front, and retain mode in the back, which means you want to cache everything in the back. So this is another way of saying exactly what Jordan Walk said earlier when he was talking about regenerate the whole thing every time, immediate mode, and then add caching, which is retain mode. That's a it's a term that you should sort of internalize, really. Jared Palmer, who actually works on Turbo Repo and today announced that he got acquired by Vercel, also breaks this down into scheduler and rebuilder. So orchestrate when work needs to be done, and then hash and then decide whether to build or extract from the cache. So slightly different terminology and slightly different cut of the work that needs to be done. But essentially, React is also a build system in that sense, that you're compiling or building from the React, the language, the tree of Lisp-like components, and then figuring out what to render onto the DOM. So the same works for build systems, static site generators, Netlify, Jamstack, CI/CD platforms, ETL pipelines, and GraphQL with data loader, which is an interesting idea. Like a lot of these have like sort of retain mode optimizers, whether they call it retain mode or not. It's caching, it's incremental site generation, whatever you call it. There's all sorts of improvements that you can make. But ultimately, if you want the right developer experience, you should try to think about immediate mode. Okay. Second lesson that I want to make is that you want to have a minimal API surface area. You want to solve a key pain for your users with the smallest possible API. This is an interesting one, mostly because like I'm stealing this directly from Seb Markberger, who is the tech lead for React. And I'm just going to summarize his talk. So you can watch this talk again on YouTube, but I'm going to summarize it because it's so good. And these are the main points. Your library is fat. You're never going to find a perfect API, so don't stop trying. Use design patterns instead of expanding the framework. Instead of adding an API for every single use case, just create one API and document how to use it in multiple use cases. It is much easier to recover from no abstraction than the wrong abstraction. You should try to remove as much complexity as you add. I wonder how close they're sticking to this in recent times. And then it is much easier to recover from an explicit repetitive API than an implicit one. So there's not much to say here apart from I think it's true. The more you sort of study React and the more you study other libraries and you see what wins and what doesn't, you can see that there's a general desire for simplicity in terms of APIs. And the reason that React's won out over, let's say, Angular is for one of those reasons. So over the course of time, React has been removing a lot of proprietary API. React used to have its own class implementation. You used to have to pass in an object to React.create class, and then it would create its own class implementation. It adopted ES6 classes. Some inspiration that I always take from is this classic Guy Steele talk called Growing a Language, which means that you should want to let your users extend your language with the use syntax so it looks native. It looks like part of the language as well, right? But and it's pretty obvious, like this is first party and this is third party, but there's no special, apart from this, there's no other special accommodation that you need to actually make that hook work. And I think that means that you can keep your language small, because users growing your language means that you don't have to do it. And so all these are fairly well-established hooks by now, but React's core did not have to keep it. And React core can move on and continue to innovate on other elements and let the community grow around this. Finally, React has also been collapsing a lot of APIs, right? So in the move from hooks, first of all, get the right state from prompts actually collapse a lot of these component lifecycle methods. But in the move to hooks, even this one is more or less not needed anymore. So it's just amazing to watch like the number of APIs decrease in time over React. So there's a cost to having a small API, which means that React is a front-end library that has no routing, no state management, no styling, no transitions, no animations, no class or head or SSR. And that's obviously why I do like Svelte for that, because it gives that capability without compromising you in JavaScript bundle size if you don't use it. So it's basically strictly additive, strictly a plus. And so I gave a separate talk on this, on essentially like the React meta frameworks and React distros, and here, like basically you can break down all the React meta frameworks as combinations of this. So React plus DevTools equals to create React app, React plus routing plus DevTools equals to Next.js and Gatsby, and then state plus data and components and hooks. These are the Redwood.js and Blitz.js of the world. And styling is kind of like the final frontier, where most people still unresolved. They're using CSS modules or CSS and JS or Tailwind. Okay, third lesson to learn. So the first two lessons were about reconciling and scheduling, and then the second lesson was about API surface area. Now let's talk about API design. API design is language design. You should name things carefully because it shapes how people think. So let's talk a little bit about the naming. So for those who don't know, there is actually a published blog post from 2016 about how React's APIs were named. And it was a very conscious decision, and it involves a whole rewrite and everything. But I thought it was a very interesting idea because you could break down all these pieces and concepts in React, the actions you could take, the operands you can make on them, as well as notifications you can get. And you can combine them to make up, for example, component did mount, or props, and then get props, whatever like that. And I thought this is basically the basics of a grammar for React, right? Like this combination of stuff lets you map out the core things that you need while keeping the language small, right? Which is the second lesson, and making it not so hard to memorize everything. Like I can see all the concepts and actions on a page, and I know that is the entirety of React. So that's pretty cool. So you can see here that here's like kind of the grammar if you analyze it. Obviously over time that some of these have gone away, but I think understanding the grammar and then understanding how that has changed with hooks, because hooks, the grammar has essentially reduced to one thing, which is use. And this is a fun list of names that were actually considered for hooks. But ultimately, I think that this reduction in grammar is the right way to go. That they really spent a lot of time on the language design before settling on the modern iterations of hooks. And that's something that everyone should take for their API design, right? API design is language design. They should seriously consider all the naming, and because it really starts shaping the format of what people use it for. And so what Dan Abramow calls it is, he says UI before API. And he expanded upon it here, saying basically that you want to start with the end result in mind, and then you want to work backwards from it. I think it's a very common problem solving or design exercise. So I'm not saying something exactly new here, but I just wanted to point it out because I think it's a very core part of how the React team that designs APIs, and therefore how every one of us should think about when we design APIs. I also like this other principle, which is that you should hack around things first, and then you should idiomatize it. So in other words, like React had this like little DOM tree of doom, let's just call it, for a long time. This is how it was like to develop in React. And then you could throw in this little Hadouken in there to to show how deep it is, and really make fun of how much nesting we have going on. Obviously, this is not great. It's not the great developer experience. It's not great user experience as well, because obviously each of these are components and they involve a fair amount of compute as well. So how can we make it better? We can create higher order components, maybe. That's mostly producing all these things. Like a lot of times to inject behavior, we needed to inject higher order components. Then we could shift to render prompts, which are maybe a little bit more ergonomic. But ultimately, and also I had my own little RFC on React.headless component, which is inspired by a Merrick Christensen blog post, which I really liked. But ultimately, I think the right idiomatic solution, all of these are hacks. The right idiomatic solutions was hooks. So we got rid of a lot of those by having a proper way to inject behaviors into components. Okay, those are the 3 lessons. Let's go for 4, and then we'll pick up the pace. So 4 is optimize for change. Don't optimize for dryness, which means you do want to repeat yourself. Don't optimize for lines of code, which means verbosity is fine to a certain extent. So we'll talk a little bit about why. So there's first order design, which I think is the most obvious, or the most obvious impact of good design, which is that something is easy to read and write. There are other concepts that are related, which is, for example, the pit of success, which is a very famous Jeff Atwood blog post. One thing that Jason Langsdorff from Netlify likes to say is that he likes to make the right thing the easy thing, right? So you're by default, you're doing the right thing. That involves a lot of value judgment, but there's very good intention there. It should be memorable. One way to have that is to have a grammar like we explored just now, so that you don't have to have unique names for all of them. You just combine different primitive names to come up with them with the thing that you want. It's guessable. This is from John O'Tander, where based on what you already know, you can guess the next thing. And that's a really good property to have for first order design. It's unambiguous. So the opposite of make the right thing, the easy thing, is to make the wrong code look wrong. And that's another essay that you should check out from Joel Spolsky as well. I'm giving you all these names, by the way, not to name drop, but mostly to give you homework. Because if you're interested in API design, you should be looking up all these names and you should be conversant with all these concepts. It represents decades of software engineering experience from the most successful people. So why not learn from them? It should be readable. I think this just means short. And then finally, encourages performance, accessibility, safety, and user experience. All right, that's first order design. What's second order? Second order is that it's easy to change. A slight change in requirements can make the most elegant code fall apart. This one, again, is an essay from Danny Ribolov. Probably my most quoted essay from him, because I think that it is very hard to define quality, but you know it when you see it, and you feel the impact when someone has not optimized for change. When some slight one standard deviation, very normal change, requires you to rewrite the whole thing, you'll be like, oh man, this is gonna take me 3 days. That is not optimized for change, right? Like the things that are changing often should be easy to change. Right. So how you do that is a very interesting question, but I'll get there. So the other 2 essays, which I really would refer you to in terms of adapting and designing for change. One is from Stack Overflow, talking about requirements volatility, and second is from Hillel Wayne, who hasn't, to my knowledge, actually published this essay, but he sort of tweeted it. So he called it requirement perturbations. And basically pointing out that the whole point of software engineering is not to code to a spec that is preset for you and will never change. That's a very waterfall style of approach. And if you're annoyed when requirements change, it's actually your problem, not the requirements problem, because the one thing that's constant is change. And we should create our software or design our architecture for expected change. Obviously, we cannot expect every change in the world, otherwise we'll never get anything done. But we can expect like 1 standard deviation change, 2 standard deviation change. For example, there's a whole list of things that you're probably going to need, and we can talk a little bit about that. So there's an essay. I'm actually going to pause here because there's been an update. So Simon Willison Pagny. So he has a really good essay based on the conversations that he and I have had on things that you're probably going to need, including things like automated deploys, continuous integration, detailed API logs, API pagination, like things that are going to be hard to change later, that if you just did it now, even though you don't need it, you will save yourself a lot of work down the line. And part of that is things that you're going to optimize for change, because you don't need it today. In terms of first order design, you don't need it today, but in terms of second order design, you're probably going to need it when you change any of your requirements. So have a think about that. All right, back to the presentation. So one of the ways that the React team likes to optimize for change is to enable local reasoning. What does that mean? Mostly it means co-location. So the original horrified reaction from React when they were presenting it in 2013 was the mixture of JS and JSX. It was like, why are you putting HTML in my JS file, right? But that enabled local reasoning, because that constituted a component that had both its markup and its JS together. And if you deleted the component, you deleted both. You didn't have to jump to a different file all over the place and try to search by name. No, you just deleted that component, right? And that's a very neat API. So that is applied to hooks as well, because you're now grouping up related functionality together instead of spreading it out among several different component lifecycles, but also with Relay compiler, with data loader and GraphQL, and then with style components and Tailwind, like those actually help to stick more things and co-locate more things inside of your components or your data requests. And that helps to enable local reasoning. So if you want a reference, you should check out Sophie Alpert's blog about this, which she's actually talking about data loader inside of here. But really, it's a very general design pattern that you can see a lot of React and Facebook technologies take advantage of. And I think it is a very fantastic rule for optimizing for change. Okay, 5, test the public API. So this one is an interesting one in the sense that you want to write tests, but what are the right tests to write? So the perfect phrasing for this comes from Guillermo Rauch, who talks about write tests, not too many, mostly integration. For the non-Americans here, this is the tagline of a very famous book from Michael Pollan, who's actually talking about what to eat. But here he's adapted it for testing. And I think he's mostly right. So the way that React did it was they actually did a full, complete rewrite of the whole React library from React 15 to 16. And the way they did it was they wrote integration tests for basically all of those features. And then they started porting the code and making the test pass, right? Which is a very common interview method, but they did it for React, which is a very ambitious goal. But also something that was pretty interesting was that they made a progress tracker, which was very motivating for the team, as well as the external user community, which was highly anticipating it, but not really knowing when this would release. Okay, so I think this is also evidence in the popularity of React libraries. So React testing library, which is much more focused on integration, has surpassed Enzyme, which is more focused on unit testing. So that's something that you definitely learn over time, which is like basically try not to couple too much to the internal implementation and try to think about what a user would care about more than the internal implementation, even down to like naming of the thing or whatever. Obviously, what is integration and what is units is actually a judgment call. There's no hard and fast rule. So it's more about thinking, try not to bind yourself too much to implementation. Okay, lesson number 6. DevTools are not optional. Help developers debug and help maintainers reproduce. So React ships DevTools. Like, it's not an optional thing. It's not a third-party solution. Like Brian Vaughn from the React team maintains the React DevTools, and they're extremely good. Here's some of the nesting work that he's done. So allowing you to vary the width so that as you go deeper and deeper, it still looks presentable, and it looks very performant with very nice hovering, and it has a lot of customization of the view. That to me is really good DevTools, right? That you really have to invest in to make your core thing. Like, it's actually nothing to do with React's core, but it makes the experience of developing with React that much better because it also helps to explain what's going on. You want to have code mods is another form of DevTools that Danny Vermolf and Sunil Pai have worked on. And yeah, a lot of times in the big breaking changes of React, they'll actually use code mods, not as a service to the community, funny enough. Actually, they need it for Facebook because they have something on the order of like 300,000 React components in Facebook. And there's no way that each developer is going to individually modify their code to match every Facebook, to match every React breaking change. So what React is going to do is, or what Facebook is going to do is, they're just going to run all these code mods internally. And when they are happy with it, they're going to release it for the rest of us to use. So I think code mods is a very underrated dev tool because it helps people to upgrade alongside, and they don't fall behind just because they don't want to rewrite stuff. Okay, dev warnings, I think, is another one, which I think is really cool, meaning that you want to make sure that when people make normal, very common mistakes, you want to have a nice warning message, and then you want to have a nice short URL for people to look up. And I think that's a really nice development experience as well. And also, you want to have lints for hooks, specifically for hooks, like this would happen at runtime or in dev time. For hooks in particular, we actually start to shift left that warning into a lint rule, right? So we start having React hooks exhaustive defs, which Dan also worked on. So these are all just like really, really cool ways of doing this. Part of that error code system, by the way, is fv.me/react warning keys. That actually redirects to the error code decoder, which you can also read about from the 2016 blog post. You see how much of this was done so early on in React that actually is a big part of the success today. You can just click this error and it will start decoding for you and telling you what that error is. So I think that's a very fundamental improvement in terms of the experience of React, and I strongly recommend having error codes in your system as a very de minimis error tool, because people are going to make mistakes. So you need to design for that and design for that experience not to be bad as well. Okay, fixtures. Fixtures help you test on an ad hoc basis some hard to reproduce errors, right? So they lower the cost of reproduction so that you can test across browsers, across a bank of different situations and scenarios, and you can see very quickly which one is failing. So I really like this practice. I kind of stolen it. But something that I've learned from talking with the React team is that you can't just have fixtures and kind of leave it lying around, because eventually those fixtures are going to go out of date. So a lot of times, so the React team doesn't want people to take the wrong impression. They actually say, like, you should try to implement an evaluation test on those fixtures as well. And then finally, you have devtools that hold the line. This one comes from Sebastian. Tools that hold the line and don't let things get worse are so powerful. For example, test coverage, which you saw with the React Freewrite, type coverage, bundle size, performance metrics. Much of APIs are not about how to break something that was once tested. And it's basically saying that you want things to only go up, or you want things to only improve. And that actually is a very nice ratchet for things to never deprove. I hope I am stating that clearly enough. But having tools that actually make sure that these common things that you don't really check for when you change code are prevented against, or at least within tolerable bounds, I think that makes so much sense. And it's something that we should always talk about, because it helps the long term by making us amortizing the cost over the short term. Okay, final one. This is probably my favorite, which is number 7, build community. You can't do this alone. You have to meet people where they are. All right, so there's a lot of confusion when JSX was first launched. This is the first talk from Jordan, and the second talk from Pete. And mostly it was an elaboration of, like, okay, in the first talk it was a complete failure because they did not meet people where they were at. They were just presenting what they thought was useful for them at Facebook, but the backlash was just really dramatic. The second talk really de-emphasized and listened to the feedback and de-emphasized the parts that were optional, right? So first of all, the first talk kind of presented JSX as part of the language, but then second talk made it optional. But it's pretty funny because Jordan actually, in his own React reflections, said that JSX was essential for Facebook because Facebook was so used to PHP that they don't mind mixing HTML and JS. But to the rest of the web development world, they're very used to keeping this separate. They thought that that's what separation of concerns meant. So you have to sort of meet people where they are and have a good sense. Otherwise, your project, even though it's very successful in one context, is going to completely flop in another. Listening to feedback. So taking that, I have a bunch of podcast recordings. I do have a personal podcast where I clip all these interviews. And Pete Hunt actually talks about their early days on IRC and in Stack Overflow, answering to every single criticism and listening rather than reacting or defending. And I think something that's also pretty interesting was that because of this work that they did, they brought on early adopters, for example, from the ClojureScript community, where they actually even talked about how to combine ClojureScript and React, and these are the first early adopters outside of Facebook, which I thought was a pretty interesting historical fact. Then you want to enable building React distros. A lot of times this is done first party. So this is Dan creating Create React App. I made a separate talk about this that you can go check out, by the way, where I go into a little bit more of the history. But I think creating React distros makes it easier for people to write React, because otherwise this was the kind of joke that people were making in 2016 about how hard it was to write React. I already talked about the talk that I have on all this React distro combinations. There are a lot more. I mean, since then, Shopify Hydrogen has come out, and I guess there's more than I don't even list on my own page. But the age of very frenzied innovation in frameworks seems to have died down, and now there's a lot of innovation on top of the existing core frameworks that have been established already. Okay, so let's recap the 7 lessons. So first, you want to have a reconciler and scheduler. Second, minimal API surface area. Third, API design. Fourth, alternatives for change. Fifth, test the public API. Sixth, mind the DevTools. And 7, you want to build community. I think these are lessons that will outlive React. I think that I will take this everywhere I go for basically the rest of my life and evaluate projects and build projects based on these choices. And I think these are solid choices that will last forever. So I'm happy to take any questions or discuss with you offline. You can reach me separately, but I forgot this part. I find 7 is a very big number, so I want to break this up. So there's a core, which is like how things work internally. There's the interface, which is how things work between the core and the user. And then you want to productionize, which means you want to make sure that it's production ready. And then you want to humanize, which means you want to build community. So hopefully core, interface, productionize, humanize. You're kind of expanding out from a core wider and wider in circles. I think that's a really nice way to frame this as well. Okay, I left. I left too many slides in my presentation. I'm already over time. Anyway, the final message I want to give is that you want to fall in love with the problems. Solutions come and go, and fall in love with the problems. And those mainly are the problems, right? You want to make development and developer experience and user experience easier for everybody. And the solutions will come and go. Today is React, tomorrow is something else. But you understand the problems and understand a tool set of how to solve them. I think that will last you very much for the long run. So thank you. You can reach me at Swix on Twitter. If you are interested in more principles that will last your entire career, because I'm a very long-term and historical thinker, you can check out my book at learningpublic.org. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your time and your knowledge. The talk was really good.
Thank you.
We have a bunch of questions.
Ooh.
The first one is this one. Is Redux necessary nowadays? I mean, context API is a perfect for shared states. What's your what you think about this question?
Redux was and never has been necessary, but it's been very useful. But context API is not a replacement for Redux. I bet Mark Erickson has a blog post or 3 or 5 that talks about the difference between context and Redux. Context doesn't have an event system, right? So it's not just about sharing state. It's also about eventing and about making things composable, right? Like, and Redux actually does that for a very large population. Like, I think the last time we did a survey of React developers, like 1/3 of them use Redux. And if you don't need Redux, don't use it, obviously. But it absolutely does not. I mean, it's basically a layer over context anyway. Redux uses context API under the hood. So saying Redux versus context API, I think doesn't really quite grasp that. So it's not necessary, but at some significant size, you're probably going to want it. And you should check out Redux DevTools, Redux Toolkit, because it makes Redux a lot easier to write.
Okay, thanks. And we have another question. Okay, this one is a little bit tricky. Angular is great to handle form in a really simple way. Do you have any suggestion for React?
Yeah, I like React Hook Form basically because it makes forms very declarative. Like, this is literally all you have to write for the form for something that's like a multi-select option menu type thing. And I think it's probably the easiest API that you can get with React. It may be a lot shorter with Svelte, but this is probably the closest that you can get it to for React.
React hook form. Okay, great. And one question for me, and question is if you can steal one feature from other frameworks like Svelte or Vue, Angular, what is this feature that you want to into React?
Oh man.
Like I like really a lot the state API of the store API, sorry, of Svelte.
Yeah, I like it too. Yeah, I like it too. The problem with that is like you can't just steal a feature because the philosophy and the underlying engine is different. So if I yeah, you can copy, you can use a store in from Svelte store in React today, but the re-rendering would not work the same because React relies on the whole tree re-rendering every single time. And Svelte stores are horizontal. They sort of publish to multiple subscribers. So I don't really think that's possible, but yeah, I think it would be nice. I think it's much easier to write than React's context for sure. I think for me, like I actually have a proposal for the React single file components. So I actually prototyped this, and it could work. We could steal single file components from React,
Great.
and I showed some existing examples of like what that might look like for React. Yeah, I mean, there's some variations of this. Like Remix has this in some way. You can have styles sort of embedded within a React component in a React idiomatic kind of way as well. All these are features that React could steal, but they choose not to because they want to leave it to users, and therefore there's absolutely zero consensus on what to do. So I think on some level, the leadership or the central group of the community has to figure out what they want, because ultimately the users are suffering because of it.
Okay, thanks. Good answer. Okay, we haven't got any other question. So I want to thank you for your time, your knowledge. Your talk was great, really,
Thank you.
and inspired me a lot. So thanks for being here today. And
Thank you very much for having me. This is lots of fun. I'm happy to talk about this async with anyone, because I think these lessons, should hopefully last us for a very, very, very long time. So I think it's worth investing in. Thank you. Thanks, Giorgio.
bye. See you
Okay.
next time. Bye
Bye.
bye.